Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Osterville Village Library. We are pleased to have today Dr. Margaret Peggy Jablonski to talk about her book, Cape Cod Camino Way.
Thank you very, very much. All right. Well, thank you for coming in person. And for those of you who might be on Zoom, I'll try to make sure I go back and forth so you see both the screen and me at some times. And I look forward to sharing with you the project I did during COVID, which was walking all of Cape Cod and looking at issues of, this is the up and down, looking at issues of history and social justice, and then how history informs today, issues of today. And what I'm going to do for you is take you on a very fast walk around Cape Cod with the PowerPoint, so you can see some things will be very familiar to you. Others you may have never heard of or thought of in this way that I'm trying to ask people to think about. So a little bit about, whoops, you shouldn't have left. I know these things happen. There we go. Sometimes if you just touch the pad. So I've had a background in higher education, worked on numerous college campuses as a dean of students. I was a professor, et cetera. And, well, oh no, how do you go back? Oh, no.
Could be there.
There's, there we go. Okay, so I still do some work as a leadership person on, working with nonprofits and colleges. So here we are, it's 2020, and the pandemic starts around March-ish. So I was told to go home like everybody else, and I went to my house in Brewster, and I started thinking about the trips I wasn't going to be able to take that year. I was planning to consider walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Has anyone walked it? Okay, yeah, I still need to do it. And so I started thinking about all these issues that were happening. Whoops, keep pressing ahead. What was going on with COVID-19? What was going on with the murders that were happening of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, numerous other people of color. And so I thought, well, the Camino in Spain is really a time to reflect and learn more about yourself and, your future. It's life-changing, as the definition there talks about. And so I said, let me take the map of Cape Cod and let me start at the bridge and end up in Provincetown. So I started the week of the 4th of July, 2020. And each week on Wednesday, I walked up to 15 miles. So I would touch every single town on Cape Cod. And I was kind of making it up as I went along. I would figure out what people, places, and stories from history did I need to know about, and then how was it impacting today? So if you remember, in 2020, we're in the middle of a pretty heavy-duty election year. There was a lot going on. And so each walk became a theme, partially because of just what was available on each walk. And you're going to be amazed, I think, at some of the things that I found. So let's start. The first walk, I was on both sides of the canal. And we looked at, in particular, our founding documents and thinking about what really is in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I would have each walk start with an intention. What were we trying to accomplish? Over the course of the summer, 43 different people walked with me. Some were relatives, many others just showed up along the way. And along the way, I would read from documents or poems or quote from songs So for the Declaration of Independence, since it was 4th of July week, I said, well, what does it mean that who has inalienable rights? Did women have those rights? Did people of color have those rights? Who gave their consent to be governed? Like the quote is, govern, using the term men. Who did that really include? It really wasn't all men either. It was property owning white men. And it basically, we talked about how the United States was founded both as an ideal and then there was a flaw. There were several flaws in the founding documents. In the Declaration of Independence, they refer to Native Americans as the merciless Indian savages. Again, I was an American history major in college. I never remember reading that, but to read it again as I was walking and thinking about it. And then we went to the Constitution and we talked about how the Constitution really was the foundation to codify the institution of slavery. It had already been on our shores for over 100 years, but by making that 2/3 of a person compromise that then kept going for decades and decades and eventually led to the Civil War, that was part of this ethos of the United States. And so I asked people to think about, well, okay, that was in the Constitution. The play, the musical Hamilton was really popular at the time. So I quoted from some of the songs from Hamilton and what did that mean? And so that was our first walk along the canal. We stopped at the Uptuxis Trading Post. That was the Plymouth 400, the Mayflower 400th year. So as I joke, I was followed by the Pilgrims the entire summer. Something popped up in every town about the Pilgrim legacy. The second walk was really interesting. I chose to focus on science and women and people of color in science in particular. I was able to go over to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and interview the chair of their diversity and equity task force. And some of the women you see there in the photo are scientists over at NOAA or Hui. And they brought their daughters to walk with us that week. And we had a fabulous discussion about what does it mean to be a girl in high school and interested in science, and how does that play itself out? And then a few other things we talked about. We met, that's the, I always get confused on names here. Over in Woods Hole, there's a statue of a woman, Rachel Carson. She wrote Silent Spring. She was one of the foundations of the forming of the EPA, helping us think about climate change. So that led me to think about, well, how many women's statues are on Cape Cod? Here's the second one from America the Beautiful, and the statue of Kathy Lee Bates. And so I Googled America the Beautiful. I know some of the words, you all do, right? But the original poem was written while she was traveling by train cross country. She's a Wellesley College alum. And listen to the stanza. Oh, great for pilgrim feet who stern impassioned stress, a thoroughfare for freedom be across the wilderness. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, till paths be wrought through wilds of thought by pilgrim foot and knee. George Floyd had just been killed by someone, an officer kneeling on him. And my sister, who was with me on this walk, said, well, I think that means they were praying. And I said, okay. So then I went to the final stanza of the poem, and it says, America, America, God shed his grace on thee, till nobler men keep once again thy whiter jubilee. That was not included in the song. And I was shocked. And I thought, what does whiter jubilee mean? It has to be something about, being white in the United States. So it was a question. And that's what happened all over Cape Cod, was we kept coming up with all of these questions. So those are some of the sites we saw along the Shining Sea trail. The third walk was really powerful. This I focused on the Wampanoag tribe, and we started at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum, which was closed at the time, but we were able to, whoops, what did I just do there? Oh, no, okay. We were able to go behind, why is it not? Oh boy, you know what, this happened in one other presentation I did. When I forward the slides, somehow all the slides don't come out on there. So what I'm going to do, for those, there's a couple people present, is I'm going to give you a book. And I'm going to call out the pages. That way you can see the same photos that are there. So I'm on page 35. So we're at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum. And yeah, there's a little problem here, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to solve it, because this has happened before, that the slides might be missing.
Okay.
So for example, it's going to skip ahead to walk 4 and I'm on walk 3. So let's just leave it for now, and then I'll see if it comes up again.
You want to be in the video, make sure that.
Okay. All right, I'll come back in since there's nothing on the screen there. All right, so at the Wampanoag Museum, we talked a lot about some of their traditions, some of the history, that obviously they were here for thousands of years before the Pilgrims arrived, that they had a fully functioning democratic society. The role of women was very prominent. And we talked about, they're basically saving the Pilgrims by helping them learn to fish and plant and clear land and all of that. And so we talked a lot about just how that year, the federal government had taken away recognition of the tribe. And the tribe was still suing, for its appropriate recognition, hundreds of years, 400 years after they encountered the Pilgrims. So then we kept walking and we went through your town, Osterville, Centerville, and over to Hyannis. And unfortunately, so look on page 38, you'll see that's a photo of my immediate family. And my brother's married to a woman from Trinidad. And that's my 5-year-old niece at the time. She's 8 now. But you can see we're wearing shirts that are purple and have the Camino Way logo. And as we walked through Centerville, we stopped to take a drink of water. And we were approached by some landscapers who asked us, "Why are you here? What are you doing here?" I didn't think anything of it at the time. My sister-in-law and my niece peeled off and walked back to town and got in a car. And my brother said to me, "You realize we were just racially profiled." They wouldn't ask a group of all white people walking who are wearing t-shirts and looking like they're probably doing a walk. And it was a gut punch to me, really, to reconsider what it was like to be a woman of color, kind of my age, who gets asked, "Why are you here?" And then we kept walking and ended up, if you go up to page 41, we had a presentation at the Zion Union Heritage Museum, which was fabulous, by John Reed, who recently passed away. He was the one of the founders of the, I'm sorry, not the founder, but the chair of the NAACP on Cape Cod and the head of the museum, and by Pamela Chatterton Purdy, who created all of those icons that you see on pages 42 and 43. And Pamela told a story about adopting children of color. And she used the N-word in her story. That landed on me like a ton of bricks. But think about how that might have landed on my sister-in-law, who has her 5-year-old daughter sitting next to her who's never heard the word. So that night, as a family, we had to deconstruct, what did this all mean? What happened to each of us today? So again, I went out for a walk, and these are the things that we got presented with to help us learn and think through, well, what do I need to do with that now? Then we kept walking. And so the fourth walk was all the way up the 6A side of Cape Cod. This was really interesting because there's so much there in terms of history, the historic district of 6A and the district courthouse you'll see right there, and Mercy Otis Warren. And we focused on policing, women as activists, and our economy and what goes on here on the Cape Cod, who are our workers, etc. I want to briefly tell the Mercy Otis Warren story because Mercy is probably the most famous woman of the American Revolution that no one has heard about. We've heard of Betsy Ross, and what did she do? She sewed the flag. Mercy helped provide the content for the first draft of the Bill of Rights. Mercy Otis Warren was an activist. She was a journalist. She was what we would call a propagandist today. She interacted with Sam and John Adams, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, several other really important people. And she was able to influence their thinking about the role for women going forward. John Hancock, Patrick Henry. And so she became a correspondent and an advisor to many of these people. Most of it was through letters, but some of it was in person through the tavern that she and her husband owned over in Plymouth. So that was really interesting. I had heard of Mercy Otis Warren and that there's an award given to prominent women on Cape Cod, but I dug into her story more, and it just made it so much more interesting that day as we looked at her history. We walked by the sign for INO, which again, there's the Pilgrims, with him talking about how they aided the Pilgrims. And then I just found so many interesting signs and symbols of what was going on in our country at the time. You know, the League of Women Voters trying to get people to register and vote, the churches showing their inclusivity in their signage along the way. And this notion of another sign that's here on page 53, I understand that I will never understand. However, I stand with you. Like, how do we stay in solidarity with each other? I stopped at the burial ground of the Nopscusset tribe, which is on 6A in Dennis. That was exceedingly interesting. I had driven by that hundreds of times and never stopped and walked in. The fifth walk, we went from all through Dennis and Chatham. This, I decided to focus on healthcare and what was going on with COVID, who was dying, who had access to resources. I ended up interviewing Dr. Kumara Siddhartha from Cape Cod Healthcare, who provided on page 59 a really nice graphic of the equitable delivery of services around COVID and what was happening across the country. And we also looked at the Cape Verdean influence on Cape Cod and their impact in terms of working the land. Many of them went into the cranberry industry, Many of them were on our boats with the whalers and sea captains. So those are an example. Remember, it was COVID, so we were testing out our ability to walk with and without masks. And those were a couple of the women who did several walks with me. This was really interesting. I'm a World War II history buff a little bit because my father was in the first wave of first assault and D-Day on Omaha Beach. And I walked into the Atwood Museum over in Chatham, and this photo literally jumped off the wall at me. Can you think why? It's a Black woman and working. She's a Rosie the Riveter. I had never seen a depiction of an African-American as a Rosie the Riveter or in the factories. And of course they were working in the factories to support the war effort. So again, it's like that visual of what do we see helps reinforce how we understand who supported the war effort. This next walk was really powerful for me because it went through my own town of Brewster, and I had to rethink the whole connection of our sea captains and where some of them earned their money. And so many of them earned their money by traveling to, China and the Far East and getting involved in that. Some of them earned their money through traditional trade, and some from whaling. Several of them, however, earned some of their funds from the transport of goods and people to and from the enslaved islands in the Caribbean and in the South. And I was able to, there we go. If you look at this headstone, the one on the right down the bottom, you can see it says her husband, Benjamin Crosby, died in Africa, 1795. And so there's been some people exploring, this is behind First Parish Brewster, and exploring the connections of many of the sea captains who were involved with First Parish. And here's a really good example. Well, what was he doing in Africa in 1795? That's not really a tourist destination that people went to. They went there for pretty much two reasons. One was gold, in search of gold or other goods, and then people to enslave and bring back. And so I started to uncover some of those stories of some of our sea captains. Here's an example of the Freeman family. And I love this house. I've stayed there many times with my family members. And they're a good example of they went to the Far East. And so I told the story of the granddaughter who went on the ships. And so I tried to also share some of the stories of the women who went to sea. And now there's some books written about them, which is great. And we ended this walk up in Eastham and took in the display right there at Fort Hill that explains, again, who was here before the Pilgrims came. And okay, so that was that walk. Walk 7, we're now in August, it's really hot. If anyone tells you that Cape Cod is flat, that is not true. Up in Wellfleet and Truro, you get a lot of hills. This was a really tough walk just because of the topography that we went through. But we decided to focus this week on writers, artists, musicians, poets. What were the cultural influences on Cape Cod, in particular from women and people of color? And so I asked each person on the walk, and you'll see if you go to 80, 81, these were some examples of photos they brought on their phone. One woman brought the book by our national poet, Joy Harjo. So we read several of her poems. Mary Oliver, the great Cape Cod poet. And so we shared like how we were influenced along the way. I just pulled up the town of Wellfleet seal, and there's 4 seals, I believe, on Cape Cod that have some form of pilgrim or Mayflower in them, all of them somewhat historically inaccurate. So here's a good example. There's no documented evidence that the Native Americans kind of greeted the pilgrims in this friendly, hello, I'm here way. If anything, they were probably standing on the cliffs in Truro and P-Town looking out and saying, ooh, this is probably not a really good thing, because what was different about the Mayflower than other fishing vessels or trading vessels that had come through here before? Can you guess? Women and children. So if you're a Native American on shore, you're looking out, and as they come ashore to get off and they're there to do their wash and et cetera, they're oh my God, they're staying, they're not leaving. And so that starts to play out, so that's an historically inaccurate depiction. Also, our Native Americans, Wampanoags, did not wear headdresses like is depicted there. And there's something else that's inaccurate there that I am forgetting. So that's an example of some of the artwork that people shared. And then our last walk, let me just say, at the end of each walk, I would gather us and say, so what did you learn today? And what are you taking away? And how are you going to incorporate this? And so the stories that came out from what people were learning were just really profound and powerful too. And some of those I've added into the book. So the last walk became Provincetown. And if you think about Provincetown, there's just from Truro to P-Town, there's so much there, freedom of everything, freedom of expression, of the arts, the LGBTQ community, the writers who've lived there, the artists who've lived there. It's also where the pilgrims first stepped foot on this continent, not the rock over in Plymouth, as you probably know. And so we ended up having a fabulous day. It was a glorious day, that last day. But this is where we started near the Truro Library. And what you see on the left are typical housing accommodations for the workers in Provincetown. And then they will get on the bus. So that's 6A, right, going into P-Town. And again, it made me realize I had walked all of Cape Cod and how different 6A looks in certain places. Some of those sea captains' homes I showed you a few minutes ago, and now this. And I thought, okay, this is part of the hidden economy that is here. I was able to go back around Thanksgiving and missing a photo there, I think. And all of a sudden there were these reenactors there. So I said, oh my God, I have to have a photo with these guys, Bradford and all the others that are there right below the relief there. And so the other thing I want to say about P-Town is I interviewed the executive director of the Tennessee Williams Festival, and their theme that year was around censorship. And he said, the thing that's important to remember about the Pilgrims' arrival is that they left. And so that they allowed 400 years of independent thinking and expression to flourish at the tip of Cape Cod, as opposed to what maybe happened in other locations. And we looked at some of the stories of the activists of the LGBT community there too. I just wanted to mention that. So reflections, what happened with all of this? Well, when I was done, I realized I had so much information, and that I had gone through this experience myself, as well as with the people who were with me, that I wanted to figure out a way to share it and help people continue to do this kind of experiential learning, whether it's just by taking this book, and you can literally walk through every town on Cape Cod and see some of these things I saw. And each chapter tells you how to do the walk yourself with your family or friends. Or continue to think about, well, what are some of these lessons that I learned that I need to share? So one of them, how do I continue to create opportunities where I can learn, reflect, integrate it, and take action? Whose stories do I need to listen to? What kind of music? What kind of movies? Pushing myself to go to things that are different than what I traditionally do. This is a big one, when traveling, seek the alternative route to find the hidden stories. And I'm going to show you an example. Engaging in real conversations, listening a lot more than what we traditionally have been doing. And then remaining hopeful, really. I mean, I found myself remaining so hopeful, given where we were the first year of that pandemic, because I was continuing to learn and I wanted to share. These are participants who came with me, some of their quotes. I won't do that. So I had all this information. I had all these photos. And so I said, all right, if you're going to write a book, you can go to Florida for the next winter, because again, it's still COVID. I'm working remotely primarily. And if you write a chapter every week, so if you notice, there's like 10 chapters, and that's what I did. I forced myself every week to write. And then on the way home, I did a 2-week Civil War civil rights tour. I didn't come up 95 like a lot of people do. I started in Mobile, Alabama. And I said, what is right here? That's Mobile. They have the most fabulous Black History Trail. All of these sites, there's a map, there's numbers, you can get in your car, because you can't really walk all of them. But I learned so much in that. I was only supposed to stay there for like 3 hours. I stayed 2 days because it was so amazing. I ended up going, so that is Gettysburg. When I got to Gettysburg, I said to the Airbnb person, well, is there anything about Blacks who might have fought at Gettysburg on either side? She said, there's actually a Black cemetery here. Her husband went and showed me, and it's still there, because even in Pennsylvania at the time, right after the Civil War, they could not be buried in this cemetery. And that just, again, was like shocking to me. I thought, wow, they should be in the same cemetery. So that's the photo of Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, still on the front steps in Alabama. Right up the road was the site where, the enslaved population was sold. I got to walk through in Birmingham, where the dogs were unleashed by Bull Connor. And just even walking through that is so powerful, so scary. And I think, oh my God, what did those children and people feel like who went through this? The photo on the right is an example of the bill of sale of enslaved people who helped then establish Washington and Lee College, which is right next to the Virginia Military Institute, which had just taken down its statues of the Confederacy. They were literally thrown in the grass behind the main administration building. So I was able, just by taking the back roads, find all these different things. And I ended up, finishing up in Plymouth at the fake rock that's there. And so here's the book that I wrote, because I felt really wanted to share this. And so I keep doing talks like this. I continue, that's for higher education. I continue to do some stuff on colleges. And so I still offer a walk every other week from the JFK Museum in Hyannis. And I weave in the Kennedy family, some of what they've done around civil rights, social justice. You have my website there and email. And I would just like to open it up for a couple minutes to say, what did you learn that surprised you? Any comments, any thoughts for those of you who are here? Oh, good.
There's just so much to the people.
So much here. Yeah. And if you'll find, you'll get, you might get caught like with one like theme, say the environment or nature, and then you can, or like someone told me all the museums, I guess, are free on Mondays. Yeah, so try to take in as many of those as you can, or, pick a town and say, I'm really going to delve into Dennis this year. And then there's so many different parts of Dennis or Chatham or, whatever, to balance out right where you live. Yeah, what if? This story. Okay, so that stems from in the civil rights movement. So if you go home, just Google Birmingham, and so this is where the African American population said we're not going to kind of take it anymore, and we're going to be on strike. And so they started having strikes for, say, the people who collected the trash and et cetera. And the police chief there, Bull Connor, basically made it his purpose to enforce every aspect of every rule to the nth degree. So they used police dogs and fire hoses. And that's some of the famous footage where you see even children being, cut down with the fire hoses and dogs attacking people. And there's the Civil Rights Museum is right there. And the museum that deals with lynching, which is so powerful to go in and see the names by county throughout the whole country, mostly in the South. But I actually stood under the plate from Chatham County, North Carolina, where I lived for 6 years when I worked at Chapel Hill. And I just read the names of people who were lynched in Chatham County. And I just cried. And I thought, I'm glad this is here so that I can remember. And that's part of what this whole thing is about, remembering, so then we can take it and say, okay, well, what do I need to do with that now, right? It's part of, I try to do these talks without getting too political, but it's an example of if we can try to engage with history in a way that we can translate it to some of what's going on today, we're not talking to each other. We're not listening. We're just shouting. We're just yelling. We're just accusing. We're just denigrating. So my thought is the more we continue to learn things that we just didn't know. I mean, I was an American history major, as I said, in college, and I didn't know some of this stuff, or I didn't remember it, and as a 60+ person now. So I had to relive it. Right. And that helps me be more aware of how I approach issues and people, and be more inquisitive. Oh, what's your story? You came here. My parents emigrated from Poland and Ireland. Yours are from Jamaica or the Ukraine, whatever. What does that mean? And why? What does that mean for immigration today? Immigration's a fraught issue, right? So how do we unpack some of this story from the last, if you really think about it in this context, the Pilgrims were undocumented immigrants with no right to land in Massachusetts. They were supposed to land at the mouth of the Hudson River, New York area. They were going to Virginia, the Virginia colony. They didn't have any right to stay here. And that led to the Mayflower Compact. That's another piece of this. So it's all connected, to me. It's really interesting. What else?
I'm surprised.
Oh, there's dozens.
I'm amazed from history.
Yeah.
Disclosed from the Cape.
Yeah. Yeah, like I mentioned Atwood. So like, that's a great thing to do is say, okay, let's one day get a friend and you go do the Atwood. And then you can actually walk right around there and see some of the, sites. Or another really good one is Wellfleet Historical Society. They have a nice little museum up there. And then you can literally walk around the town of Wellfleet and see some of the sites.
The other thing that you mentioned is that I don't know why it shocks me now, but you just think people wouldn't say that sort of thing.
Yeah, the use of
People who are
language.
walking innocently walking through community, and
Right,
yet they point to you folks.
right.
It just kind of shocks me nowadays that sort of thing happens. And I don't know why, because they're killing people. So
Yeah, what I think is helpful when we get confronted with those kind of things is, stop, pause. I let the feeling kind of come over me of what that felt for me, but then try to think, well, what did that feel like for them? And I don't want any child of any race or any socioeconomic status, whatever, to feel unwelcome, to feel targeted in any way, right? I don't want an adult either. I particularly don't want a child to be growing up that way. So that's helped me think through, again, how do I be a better aunt? How do I be a better ally? How do I make sure she's safe when she comes, visits me, that kind of thing, whether it's here or in Florida. Yeah. Yeah, so with the Kennedy Museum, Wendy Northcross is the executive director there, and she used to be the head of the Chamber of Commerce, right? And so she heard one of these talks and she came up to me, she said, oh I've wanted to do a walk in Hyannis, and they have the Kennedy Legacy Trail. It's just 10 sites. And she said, would you be willing to put something together that kind of blends your perspective and what you found of the stories, some of these stories on Cape Cod, and blend in the Kennedy legacy to it? And there's so much, the Kennedys with the environment, right? Jack and Jackie supported Rachel Carson. There was actually, this is a little unknown fact, there was a female brain trust operating in the White House, headed by Eleanor Roosevelt and Jackie Kennedy. Like, we think of Jackie Kennedy just around fashion and food and glamour, etc. She cared about the environment, and so did Jack and all the Kennedys. Why? Because they grew up here, looking at that beautiful, scenery and the environment. They wanted to do what they could, hence the National Seashore. Otherwise, that would look like New Jersey or whatever, parts of Atlantic City. There's so many pieces of the Kennedy legacy, from civil rights, affordable health care, that was Ted's mandate. Some of the current generation around mental health care issues, the Special Olympics, Yeah, so there's so much that they got involved with. And so that's what I do every other Wednesday morning. I offer a walk from the Kennedy Museum. So, and then on Thursdays afternoons, I'll be doing one in Brewster. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope I do see you or mention it to others. And I'm just gonna, for the people who will watch this online, go back to here. So you have a contact information. Please feel free to reach out with, via email with any questions or comments if you watch this on YouTube later. And the website is there and the book is available on the website. I have them here for $20. It's $24 on the website. So thank you so much for coming today and thank you for watching online.